But that is a bald-faced, unethical practice. What happened there? It's not what he said.
But this is
nasty
this
people.
isn't journalism. This is activism, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a sort of overt politicisation at the BBC, but there's a sort of casual, unthinking, young, lefty kind of progressivism.
Director General of the BBC seems to be like a cat with 9 lives. I reckon he's up to like 7 or 8 of them now. Story rocking back in Britain. The BBC is in the dock tonight after leaked documents reveal its flagship programme, Panorama, edited Donald Trump's January the 6th speech to make it look like he encouraged a riot. Have a look at this.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
He added there peacefully as well. Cut out. Tim Shipman, you're a man that's, edited tens of millions of words for your Brexit tomes. And, a long distinguished career in journalism. You can edit a quote down to make it fit. But if you fundamentally change the meaning of the quote or make it look sexier, which I argue that clip does, you're into dangerous ethical ground, aren't you?
Yeah, and if you ever edit a quote for length to keep the more interesting bits in, you should be putting dots in it to show that you have done so. Now, you can't do that on television, but I mean that, I think Trump's speech taken as a whole that day, it's perfectly reasonable to have a view that he was egging something on rather than trying to calm it down. But that is a bald-faced, unethical practice. What happened there? It's not what he said. And, I think if you're going to make the argument that he was encouraging something, you need to show the whole clip. Simple as that.
As BBC, we'll come to BBC in a moment, but just in terms of the unhelpfulness of this to, saving the West, to the special relationship. You've got Don Jr., Trump raging about this all day. The White House is saying they're looking into this. The BBC, it's not like what they are publicly funded. They are, in Americans' minds, they're meant to be the sort of impartial, untouchable sort of bastion of news. I mean, obviously, having lived in Britain, we have different versions. Recollections may vary, you might say. But they do have a responsibility not to cock this stuff up.
Yeah, no, totally. And they've got into trouble quite a bit recently.
Yeah.
There was a documentary in Gaza where it turned out that they were quoting people, poor, impoverished children who just happened to be the son of, a minister in the Hamas government, which was not revealed until later.
Just mind-blowing.
Look, at some level, the Beeb can be undone by unethical practice from, 1 or 2 people in its ranks or in the production company that's producing the thing that they've hired.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because of their international reputation, and let's go back to, the days of sort of tyranny in Eastern Europe and those kind of places, the BBC was supposed to be the sort of impartial clarion call. If you were listening to the BBC in a country that was living under a dictatorship, you were getting the unvarnished view rather than the propaganda that was being pumped out by your own state broadcasters. And the problem here is that, the Beeb is, much beloved in Britain, but at the same time, it does have a kind of culture of middle-of-the-roadism that leads a lot of the people who work for it to think that they're doing the Lord's work by exposing what they think of as nasty people.
This isn't journalism, this is activism, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Even the fact that the airing of that Panorama documentary that has now been shown to have been spliced and diced. That was on the eve of the US elections. I didn't see a documentary about how useless and incompetent Kamala Harris was.
No, and we saw it at home with Brexit and Boris Johnson's premiership, and now, in the States with this, 2 terms of Trump. These people drive a lot of folk on the sort of centrist, liberal, libertarian, the sort of the progressive left completely balmy, and it means that they lose, their sort of faculties. They seem to think that it's legitimate to depict them in a certain way.
Trump derangement syndrome, you might call it.
Exactly.
Tim Davie, BBC, just finally on this one, Director General of the BBC, seems to be like a cat with 9 lives. I reckon he's up to like 7 or 8 of them now. There've been, as you said, so many of these scandals. How do you clean this up? How do you root this stuff out without it doesn't seem to be chopping and changing Director General here and there. It doesn't seem to be doing the trick.
No, and anyone who knows Tim Davie knows that he's a man gently of the right rather than of the left, and actually it's sort of ironic it's sort of dropped into his lap. But lots of people who've worked there will say that there's not a sort of overt politicisation at the BBC, but there's a sort of casual, unthinking, young, lefty kind of progressivism that doesn't really wear political colours, but is just sort of... It's a sort of soppy... establishment view of people who've come to challenge. And in this day and age, populist leaders are doing very well by talking about what they think the public really wants to talk about. And if Mamdani does win in New York, it's actually because he talked about rent and about the cost of living and buses and stuff that people care about.
Nationalising
most of those people who are voting for him are probably not, communists or Marxist-inspired theoreticians. They're people who want things to be a bit cheaper and to get more buses. But this is what Donald Trump did very well here. It's what the Brexit campaign did very well in Britain, is to actually energise people around what they want. And a lot of the people who've done very well out of globalisation and out of mass migration and all of that, they just instinctively don't like it. They think it's, they think it's wicked. And as a result, they put aside, a bunch of professional kind of pledges that they've made about how they should behave because they think it's justified to try and tell a particular story about some of these people. And, President Trump sometimes makes that too easy for them, as I think he probably did in that speech on that day. But to edit it in that way is entirely unethical.
Very good. Let's move on. Elon Musk says that Britain faces civil war unless it stops importing voters via mass migration. He made an extraordinary comparison that Britain are like the hobbits in the Shire, protected by the hard men of Gondor out in the West, and actually are living in a sort of, have been living in a delusion and are now waking up to the horrors of mass migration. We talked about foreign interference in the US elections, and obviously Elon Musk is no longer a member of the US administration, but he has got a remarkable level of influence over British politics at the moment. I mean, his intervention on the grooming gangs back in very early January of this year sort of, for the first time, sort of distilled that story into 1, 2 or 3 weeks of boiling rage and anger that eventually led to a promise from the government of an investigation into the rape gangs, but still trying to get that up and running. On the right, particularly, the Reform were flirting with Musk a little bit. Rupert Lowe, the MP, has got he's funding Tommy Robinson's legal challenges left, right and centre, and politicians like Robert Jenrick on the Tory side, Katie Lamb, they're saying stuff that even a year ago you wouldn't have been able to. Do you think it's a helpful or and again on the ethics of it, this is the world's richest man using his train set platform to basically conduct and change, and intervene in politics of a different country?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been hugely influential, and I think he's moved, that Ponzi phrase that lots of people in politics use, the Overton window, the sort of what is kind of acceptable to say. He has stretched that quite a bit and certainly shifted it to the right. And you're right, there's a lot of mainstream politicians who now parrot what he says. Interestingly, when he first talked about the grooming gangs, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, basically said, I'm not interested in that. It's all being got up by the hard right. But actually, in the end, he was forced to go along with it. They're obviously dragging their feet now because they don't really want to do it in an effective way. But, Musk... But look, I think there is always a danger when big foreign figures start throwing their weight around. Yeah. People instinctively don't like being told what to do by people from elsewhere.
Barack Obama back of the queue if you vote for Brexit didn't like that.
That's the case I was about to say. I mean, when Obama agreed to do that, the then Prime Minister David Cameron and his Chancellor George Osborne were cock-a-hoop. They were absolutely delighted. They thought it was brilliant. Everyone loves Obama. He'll tell us this. And it turned out most voters in Britain didn't want to hear that from Barack Obama. They thought that was pretty outrageous. And, you know, I think the general view is that fueled votes for Leave in the end. And, you know, I think a lot of people look at Musk. They don't like the influence he's got. They think he's staring at all their social media messages. He's probably got better things to do. But I think there's not that Musk will care. He can have his influence. Yeah. And there's a lot of people in the world. I mean, I've been in DC for only 24 hours on this visit, but I've already spoken to a lot of people who say, you know, there are a lot of people in and around Trump who kind of really have a kind of atavistic love of Britain, and a sense of the old-fashioned values, the rule of law, Parliament, all that stuff going back, and they almost feel like Britain is itself throwing away those
exactly. This has been a long-running theme of the show, is that actually they're Americans. It's out of a love of a weird way. You
see that with J.D. Vance. You see it with people like Sebastian Gorka. You see
the late Charlie Kirk's speech, the Oxford Union. I often cite. England is America's mother. And in fact, they took a lot of great things we did and ran with them and made them better, arguably. On J.D. Vance, obviously he sort of he got a lot of backlash in. I think it was March, was it, when he did his Munich speech about free speech in Britain, about free speech in Europe, and the old country and the old world sort of forgetting the values they put in. There was a big backlash in Britain about it, but then actually since then. There was a lot of shouting at the time, but now actually we're talking about free speech in a way that we weren't before. The Metropolitan Police are coming out and saying, you know what, we're not going to do any more of these non-crime hate incident forms that see 12,000 people with a sort of weird sort of Orwellian piece of paper from the state telling them they've been a very naughty boy, but they're not going to go to prison. I mean, the window, you're right, has moved, and it has been. You can argue that it has been helpful for the boy in the Emperor's New Clothes to just go, what is going on?
Yeah, and it sometimes takes someone from outside to really identify it and to spot it. Because whenever there's creeping change in a country, it's a bit, it's the old boiling a frog analogy. You maybe don't necessarily notice these things evolving. It puts a lot of people's noses out of joint, but sometimes they feel that they can't say it. And collectively, people sometimes, it feels like the people complaining are a bit cranky. But when someone from outside comes in who's got a proper platform and a bit of clout and says, hang on a minute, this is completely nonsensical, I think it does allow people to step back and say, should we really be doing this? And actually, but I think the benefit then is in, the politicians of that country then getting to grips with it as to the degree they have at home, and rather than sort of Musk continuing to bang the drum and interfere all the time.
On a final point on that, I mean, obviously, I think Donald Trump has publicly said he gave Keir Starmer a massive kicking all the way around of Scotland and Windsor over our suicidal economic policy. Very quickly, in 20 seconds, Tim, do you think the British government are going to move on any of that? There seems to be a slight softening on net zero.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they understand that that is a policy that is dragging them to penury, but they're in a very difficult position, and the left of their party is asserting itself in a quite